Cape Cod Broadcasting weaves the listening environments of 99.9 WQRC, Ocean 104.7, WFCC Classical 107.5, Cape Country 104, and CapeCon.com's website experience to reflect the lifestyles of the people who live, work, and play on Cape Cod. We hope that you enjoy this podcast.
This is Sunday Journal. I'm Dan McCready. Plymouth is one of the most historic towns in the country, best known for the arrival of the Pilgrims in 1620. The town has changed a lot since then, and a new book entitled Plymouth Through Time will use photography to demonstrate how the community grew over the years with new industries and populations. Joining me today is a book's author, James Baker, who will discuss the growing evolution of America's hometown. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you.
So, first of all, what was the inspiration for this book?
Well, I'd done a couple other books by Arcadia Publishing of Plymouth history. I've always interested in what used to look like. And years ago, I spent time identifying about 4,000 photographs that the Pilgrim Society has at Pilgrim Hall. And I thought, it would be nice to have some of these published. And finally, I was contacted by Arcadia, and I said, okay, I will do it. So I did 2 of those books. And then after a while, Fonthill, a new publisher, who actually grew out of Arcadia, it's the same people who used to be Arcadia, contacted me and said, would you like to do a different one? I never thought I'd do another. Didn't think there was enough new old pictures to work with. But they said this will be different. This would show before and now. And so my son-in-law is a photographer, and so I decided I would go ahead with it.
All right. Well, now, how far back does this book go?
Earliest pictures are probably 1870, that period. And the latest of the old pictures, which are all done in a sort of sepia, probably goes up to 1960s. I took 1 or 2 of them myself.
Oh, wow. So over 100 years of Plymouth history in this book.
Yes, I wish we had more, but we don't have photographs before that.
Oh, so you couldn't get a photo of Miles Standish?
People want it. People would love to have it. I mean, you can't get any Pilgrim images, and people would rather they did, but no.
So how many photographs are in this book in total?
92.
Wow.
And, there'll be the before, and then there'll be the after of each. Actually, there's pairs of photos. And the original ones, like I said, are done in sepia, and the new ones are all done in color. And I think the great strength of this book compared to the other ones is the other ones, I knew where everything was, but a lot of people couldn't make head and tail out of it, even though I tried to describe them. This one, they can see what's on the ground today, and they know where the original photo was taken.
And and where did these photos? Now you mentioned you took a few yourself, but where did a lot of these come from? Where did you find this material?
Well, along with the Pilgrim Society, which probably provided the bulk, and they're getting part of the profits of the book. There's the Old Colony Club, there's Plymouth Plantation, and ones I've picked up here and there over the years. And so it's mostly the Pilgrim Society, but I'm so familiar with their collection. The hard part was skinning it down to fit 92.
Yeah, because I imagine in that period, lots of interesting photos, I would gather.
Well, there are. And Plymouth changed a great deal. Now, they've torn down great hunks of it over the years. Back in 1920, they tore down the entire waterfront. What had been a big port with 7 wharves and all the warehouses and chandleries and other buildings that supported that, it had more or less gone out of business by that time. So they took it down and made what's now around Plymouth Rock, 2 little bumps with the rock in the middle. And then in the 1960s, we had urban renewal, and that took down another whole great chunk of old Plymouth. And that was what I took pictures of when they were doing that in the 60s. I volunteered, again, for Pilgrim Hall to do pictures. So I'm familiar with all this because the changes, more or less, a lot of them have occurred in my lifetime.
And so you mentioned the area around Plymouth Rock, and that's probably the most, I would say, most dramatic, probably, change in Plymouth that occurred, or at least the most shocking to people, I would imagine.
Well, people liked it at the time. I think just as much, though, was the High Street, Summer Street urban renewal. That took down about 90, 100 houses, some of them 17th century. And that changed the face of downtown Plymouth, within living memory, as opposed to people who could remember what it looked like before 1920.
Now, one of the things that I've seemed to be gathering from the book is that the town, throughout its history, kind of had a somewhat of an out with the old, in with the new attitude where, things are changing, we're just going to take this down, put in the new thing, and just keep moving forward. Do you think that's a fair assessment of things?
That's quite a fair assessment. The thing is that outside the Pilgrims, and nothing survives from the Pilgrim, the early Pilgrim period, the Plymouth Plantation period, you might say. Industry came in the 1790s, the first iron mills, and then cotton and woolen, thread and weaving mills. There was a huge industrial boom, including the great cordage company, the largest in the world. And those were all just fading out in the 40s, 50s. Some of them had died before that, but most of them were still going. And that's almost entirely gone today. So the changes that the mills brought, because the mills attracted a lot of immigrants. So we have a large, there were Germans, Irish, and Italians, and Portuguese all immigrating into Plymouth. And when I grew up, that was sort of the old town, except, of course, North Plymouth didn't care for Chiltonville, which is South Plymouth. That was the old Yankees and Chiltonville and immigrants in North Plymouth.
So the town has not only gone through, like you said, an economic and industrial economic changes, but there have been huge demographic shifts over this time.
Oh, absolutely. The population of Plymouth was a little under 14,000 in World War I, and it was about 14,000 back in the 1950s. It is now about 60,000. And originally, most of the town was sort of cramped up into the downtown corner, you might say, the upper northeast corner. And the rest of it was, a lot of it was woods, summer homes down in Manamet, which had more or less grown up after around 1900 or so. And today, it's not so much summer homes, so there are some left, of course. It's people making West Plymouth and South Plymouth areas that I can remember driving through or hunting rabbits in with nothing else.
Now, with this kind of out with the old, in with the new perspective that the town has, when something new comes along, they just kind of get the old stuff out of the way, put in the new. At what point did the town ever have a reflective moment or where it said, oh, wow, this is our history. It's going away. We've got to do something to keep it. We've lost so much. Was there a point where that happened with the town?
Yes, about 1970, just after the urban renewal. That put it in everybody's mind that, we're losing a lot. We lost a whole bunch. And at that point, they created the Downtown Historic District. There's still a Historic District Commission, which I'm on. And it was like, well, let's see what we can do to save what we've got left. It's not always worked as well as it might. Just about everything to do with the old factories are gone, and they're now removing all the dams on Town Brook. There used to be 6 dams, and each one of their mills and factories, and now they're taking the dams themselves out. So there's very little visual now of what it used to look like.
Now, when somebody is looking at this book, what are some of the more recognizable places and people maybe that you might see in this book?
We didn't put people in. Most of the pictures are topographical. They're the physical layout of the town. And, as you look through, it moves in a spiral direction from the core of the town, which is Town Square, where the churches are and the old courthouse, and it moves around town, along the waterfront, and then they make a brief trip south as far as Manamet and north to North Plymouth and the Cordage Company.
And as this... as you were putting this book together, what kind of perspective did you have about, because you're from Plymouth yourself?
Yes.
What perspective did you have on your hometown that maybe wasn't there before?
I don't think it changed much. Haven't done the other two books. I think probably the thing that impressed me was how difficult it is sometimes to get images that more or less mimic the original pictures. I mean, when the original shots were done, some were done for standing out in the street. And when John went out to photograph in the street, he got run over a couple times. Others were taken from heights, from factory chimneys. We couldn't recreate that one. There's one shot when they're taking down the waterfront in 1920. There was a coal wharf and some buildings on it, and somebody got up the second or third floor of the coal wharf, and they took a picture of the ruins being burned off. Basically, they torn everything down, and they set fire to a lot of the old timber. And I thought, well, that's one people should see, but how do we recreate it? So I had John climb up the mast of the Mayflower, get into the tops. He'd never done that before. And we only did that by luck at the last moment because the Mayflower was out of town longer than ever before last year. But the other one, we actually rented a plane and got one or two aerials, although that was a problem. The main aerial I wanted was of where the old Mayflower Hotel was. We tried to do it on the ground, and there was things in the way. And so we got up in the plane, but I couldn't get the exact angle we wanted because as we flew down towards White Horse Beach, where this was, the pilot said, we can't get that angle. President Obama is on Martha's Vineyard, and you can't go within 30 miles of Martha's Vineyard, and we're just on the edge of it. I'd lose my license, he said, if I took you exactly right. So that one is a little off kilter.
Mm-hmm. So, but you said that when somebody's flipping through these, they're going to see kind of the comparisons, and what will really strike people? What do you think their final impression will be when they go through the book?
Well, I think they'll see that Plymouth was really there were many more buildings and many more interesting things going on then, and the additions are strange. Most people today are used to going down Main Street, and they go down Main Street Extension across Town Brook, and then they continue on Sandwich Street. But that wasn't there before 1908. And, the picture showing looking up that way, you couldn't recognize it at all today. Everything is torn down. Everything has been removed. And the other thing is I think people will look at it and say some things haven't changed, or they haven't changed that much. Mm-hmm. But there's a mix of both.
Okay. And, of course, now you can't talk about Plymouth, and we talked about it a little bit, but, of course, you can't talk about Plymouth without talking about Plymouth Rock.
Yes, Plymouth Rock. And being a historian of Plymouth, I've done a guidebook of Plymouth, too. They told me I could write 40,000 words at top, so I got exactly 30,000 words in. And part of that was about Plymouth Rock, how it began, where the idea came from, and how it's been handled. It was first identified in 1741 when Elder Thomas Faunce heard they were going to build a wharf over where the rock was, and he had always taken his family down and pointed out that's where the Pilgrims landed. There's no other evidence beside his. But he was born in the mid-17th century. His father was one of the early colonists, and he certainly knew people like John Alden and other the younger colonists. Anyways, he identified the rock, and then it sat. And then at the time of the Revolution, 1774, as people were getting agitated, Colonel Theophilus Cotton was asked to move the rock from the waterfront, because they did have wharves around it, up to Town Square. And they put a liberty pole next to Town Square and the top half of the rock, because when they were pulling it up, it broke in half, which I thought was wonderful. That meant there would be a peaceful division between Britain and America, which, of course, didn't happen. No. And then people started taking souvenirs. The rock started to shrink, or the upper half started to shrink. The lower half was still in the wharf. And so in 1834, they dragged it to Pilgrim Hall and maybe broke the crack in it at that point, and put it behind an iron fence. And it wasn't until 1880 that it went under a canopy back down in its original site on the waterfront. So,
and now, of course, we're getting ready for 400th anniversary coming up not that far away now, and the town's going to be preparing for that. So that's going to happen.
Oh, it's been trying to prepare. It hasn't been working very well. Reverend Peter Gomes, who is one of Plymouth's most famous people, he was the chaplain at Harvard and the professor at Harvard, volunteered to, I think it was 2007, to head up a town committee for the 400th. And we started. I was one of the original 5 people that were doing that, and we got the committee going, and we began spinning wheels, and they're still spinning wheels. The big problem is raising the money. A lot of people in Plymouth don't want to pay for anything if it isn't plowing their driveway, and so we'll get there. In 1970 at 350th, that went through the same kind of conniptions, and eventually it came out fine. In 1920, of course, at that time, the Pilgrims were a major part of the American story. Today, they're not anywhere as fashionable as they were then, and there was a great deal of money. In fact, they even had an excess. And, of course, that's what allowed them to tear houses down, not only on the waterfront but elsewhere, to make ready for the Pilgrim story. So we'll get there, but right now nobody really knows how they're going to do it.
And so we've been talking a lot about Pilgrim's past and how it's changed over this 100-year period. What do you see coming for Plymouth's future? If you can, where do you see Plymouth going from here?
Plymouth is going to continue to grow. I mean, we now have industrial parks and malls. For a long time, the only mall was out in Kingston because Plymouth didn't want a mall. And then they saw, money's going to Kingston. So they started building, plazas and such like. And it's going to continue to grow, but most of it's going to probably be population. As I said, the population is just about 60,000 now. In 5 or 6 years, they figure it will be 70, maybe 73,000. It's continuing because Plymouth is the largest town in Massachusetts in area. It's about 100 square miles, and there's still a lot of trees that they can get out of the way and put up houses.
And, of course, now we're going to talk about a lecture that you have coming up on Wednesday.
Yes, at Pilgrim Hall. They're closed in January, but they're opening for the lecture. I'm going to be talking about the book and basically talking like we have today and showing slides of what we couldn't get in there and the problems we had getting in what we did get in there. Because I expect the pictures in the book, I want them to buy that book in order to look at those rather than what I'm going to show them. But it's going to be the background of how this all came about and some of the things I'd love to have shown but could not.
Well, unfortunately, we are just about out of time right now, but I wanted to thank you so much for coming in today and having this wonderful discussion about this very famous community. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
My guest today was James Baker, author of Plymouth Through Time. Mr. Baker will be holding a book signing and lecture at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, January 22nd at the Pilgrim Hall Museum in Plymouth. For more information, you can visit the museum's website, pilgrimhallmuseum.org. I'm Dan McCready, and this is Sunday Journal.
This podcast is a presentation of Cape Cod Broadcasting, which is solely responsible for its content. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit us at capecodbroadcasting.com.